Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Recruitment Curry show. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most interesting discussions going on in the recent times about artificial intelligence. I'm thrilled to host Ben Jackson, the founder and CEO of Cogency Labs. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Ketan. It's really good to be here.
Fantastic. So Ben, why don't you tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and how does it relate to recruiting, talent acquisition, and
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. So I've been in recruitment and kind of talent acquisition for well over 20 years now, and I kind of started out on the agency side, as a lot of people do, then went in-house, then ended up in RPO for about a decade. I was a commercial director for an RPO firm, then I went in-house again, and then about 3.5 years ago, I was running an employer brand agency and decided to set up Cogency, which is obviously my business, because really I was keen to do something that helped organizations, employers, to address the challenges that they had with recruitment processes and systems. Because obviously, having been in this world for over 2 decades, I've seen an awful lot of those kind of challenges, both from the kind of the supplier side and the in-house side. And that's really what we do. We help organizations to solve those problems with the way that they recruit, their processes, and in particular their technology. And I guess this was really timely, and thanks ever so much again for asking me to join this. But you might ask, well, why AI? But so many of our clients are now asking us to kind of demystify AI right now, to help guide them as to how they can use it. And of course, we're always interested. We're curious. We're interested in how we can use new tools to solve problems for the clients. So there you go. That's me.
Perfect. So let's start with the basics. What is Gen AI?
So there's been an awful lot written about this, and some of it is kind of not 100% accurate. I'll try and kind of summarize it as quickly as I can. So put simply, it's a type of artificial intelligence that generates responses. So effectively, you as a user create a bunch of prompts, what's known as prompts, which are your instructions to the AI to do something. And then using large language models, which are the kind of the technology that underpins this, which are basically like these highly developed technological neural networks, a little bit like the brain has neural networks. Those are trained to analyze huge quantities of data at incredible speed to work out answers to your prompt. So this is where the artificial intelligence piece comes in. It's not simply going on Google and saying, where's the best place to eat in London? It's not that, because that's a very, very specific prompt, and it's looking at one particular type of data based on that. This looks at the whole of the internet, and it's looking at everything, not just from the point of view of simple instruction, a simple basic instruction, but also deploying natural language processing, which is kind of the game changer here. Because what a lot of people have been kind of talking about for the last kind of couple of years is how AI can become conversational. So rather than having to have a degree in computing or computer science or whatever it might be, in order to work with these AI tools, some of which have been around for kind of a little while, you literally go on, it's got a simple user interface, and you start to have a conversation with it, which is you sharing your prompts. So this is the key. Through using these large language models, these incredibly developed neural networks, and this conversational interface, effectively AI becomes completely democratized. So it's totally accessible. You can tell it what to do, and this is the first time it's done it. And just as a kind of an example of how quickly this has been taken up, ChatGPT, which is obviously the most famous one, that kind of appeared a few months ago via the company OpenAI, they were up to 100 million users in 2 months. So this is a really, really big thing.
Wow. So when it comes to recruiting and talent acquisition, how does it relate? Because that's what we want to talk about. How is it going to help recruiters?
Absolutely. So it's hugely relevant to recruitment, and I think there's still a lot of work going on to understand exactly what the different kind of use cases are. around it. But there's also a lot of stuff that people are already doing, a lot of behaviours on the candidate side that we're seeing change quite quickly as well. So there's a lot happening, and there's a lot that's kind of relevant. I think it's really important to stress that at the moment, the kind of key things are any task on either the recruiter or the candidate side that requires the user to write a bunch of stuff or to create something. So typically you might see that in application forms, resumes, you might see that in recruitment policies, you might see it in job specs, job adverts, etc. That kind of thing. So generating that kind of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But one of the other interesting things is that because of this natural language processing capability, let's say, for example, I don't know, you're a candidate, you've been offered a job, it's 5K less than you'd be hoping for. You can use a generative AI model to ask it questions about how you would negotiate to get a better salary package. You can give it lots of different prompts, and it'll give you loads of arguments. By the same token, you switch that round, and from a recruiter perspective, if you're trying to negotiate with a hiring manager, or you're trying to negotiate or close a candidate, you know, and it's a particular set of circumstances, again, you can use those things. So if you think about it as a kind of a means of generating content, it's called generative AI, so generating content, first of all, of whatever type that is, but also helping to guide you through processes and situations where it can give you some ideas. And that's the way that I would kind of look at it.
Right. So basically, it boils down to the quality of questions you ask. You know, essentially, you know, what we call the prompts. If you ask relevant questions, you'll get relevant answers, or you know, it's garbage in, garbage out.
100%. And the prompt piece is something that if there's kind of one key takeaway from this, it's to do some work with the tools. And really understand how to prompt more effectively. There are tools out there that can help you, which is something that I think we'll cover in a bit. But yeah, absolutely. I think if you start, funnily enough, we had a team meeting last week. We were doing some work with GPT-4, and if you just chuck something out there and it's a little bit kind of random and it's just a kind of a sentence, you will get something back, and you can get quite a lot of stuff. But it's how you continually iterate what you're asking. It's how you learn how to ask more prescriptive things of the technology. That's the bit that people need to be getting good at, because otherwise, with the best will in the world, you can actually waste a lot of time on generative AI if you're just putting random stuff in, and it will just give you random answers. So yeah, you're absolutely spot on. That kind of prompting piece is really important.
Totally. And then, you know, we've seen more and more, you know, businesses out there, and, you know, especially on Twitter, you know, we see lots of threads on how to ask prompts, or, you know, white papers on prompts. And then, you know, which is the interesting bit. But, you know, coming back to the candidate side of things, and, you know, we've again seen lots of tools, you know, where candidates can utilize, you know, Gen AI. How does it help the candidates?
No, absolutely. So I think the first thing to look at is resumes. So ultimately, you can give prompts to the technology asking about the kind of work that you've done, and ask it to write, you know, put into words how you would best express the kind of the work you've done. And that's kind of particularly topical at the moment, with everyone talking about kind of skills-based recruitment and so on. So there's that. If you've ever worked in, for example, student hiring, it's quite common to have like long answer application forms. So you'll put in your bio data, but then you'll have a bunch of, you know, 200 or 300 word questions that are assessed. Well, that's kind of out of the window now, because anyone can look at that application form, look at the question, type it into GPT, and all of a sudden they'll get a really, really good answer for those application forms. So that's quite an interesting kind of shift in that space. It can also help with some of the more traditional online tests, and even situational judgment tests as well. So if your test requires an answer to a question, not necessarily just kind of multiple choice, then obviously candidates can use that. So there's a big piece around how we govern the use of online tests more effectively and which online tests will become obsolete as a result of this technology. We've already seen, and there's lots of articles out there about using GPT-4 to pass things like the bar exams or professional or academic exams. It's really, really good at those kind of things. So that's kind of scary from a kind of a longer term perspective. What does that mean for the education space? But anyway, we're not going to talk about that today because we don't have time. Creating interview responses. This is one that I've thought about a lot. If you're using traditional competency-based interview questions, people have been preparing for those for years, but this way you can get ChatGPT to prepare them for you. So if you think somebody's going to ask you about, a time when you worked as part of a team, chuck it into that and see what that comes out with. So, there's going to be a lot more preparation on that. Pre-prepared presentation. So if you give your candidates tasks to do before they come to an interview or an assessment center, well, there's nothing to stop them using, again, generative AI to solve those problems. And we've definitely seen with some of the kind of the offline kind of coding challenges that people do, you can ace it because generative AI can write code. So you can ace those kind of things. Now, obviously, there's still an element where these are not human responses. But it's been fascinating watching some of the people talking about this kind of stuff on Twitter recently and on LinkedIn. There was one response I read last week where somebody said that they'd spotted that the code was generated by AI because it was too perfect. So you kind of think, okay, where does that leave us from that perspective? Anyway, that's all kind of interesting. LinkedIn profiles. So, people will be able to kind of generate content to go on their LinkedIn profiles. And as I said before, negotiation points. So if somebody's sitting there going, I don't really know what my kind of arguments are for wanting an extra 10K on the salary or, whatever it might be, then this can help you. It can guide you. So it's a really, really clever tool from a candidate perspective.
Lots of use cases there, right from resumes to LinkedIn profiles to acing the tests, preparing for the interviews. And it's an interesting one because from the recruiter's perspective, how do you evaluate if the candidate is the one, or if they know what they know, or if it's Gen AI, which is what they are trying to use and then respond. So are there any tools currently to sort of mitigate these risks that come along with Gen AI?
Yeah, there are. And the first one is which is really basic. But if you're worried about this and if you don't want people using AI, and it's not guaranteed that every organization will not want their candidates to use AI because it might be relevant to the kind of jobs that they're going to be doing. But anyway, assuming you don't, then the first thing to do is to have an open kind of dialogue with your candidates through the content that you put on your website, in the interviews that you give them, and actually discourage them from using it and say, look, we're really, really keen to see the real you. We don't want you to do this. The chances are that when you get to an interview, we'll spot that there were some kind of discrepancies or whatever. So, you can have that open dialogue. There are, however, some really good tools. So Copy Leaks, OpenAI have got an AI classifier. There's various other kind of classification tools that have launched, obviously, in response to this, which are designed to spot whether or not a piece of text or a piece of content has been generated by AI or by humans. So really easy to find. Google them, have a look at what you can find out there, but you could potentially use those. The flip side to that is that's really time consuming. So I don't think we're at a point yet where we understand exactly how we're going to be able to kind of police these things. There's other things that you can do as well, but if you really wanted to look at something and you were suspicious, then any of the kind of the open source classifiers will at least give you a start, although they do all claim that they're not 100% accurate. So you kind of need to bear that in mind as well.
Sure, definitely. And then, we were just chatting before we went live about the availability of number of tools, at disposal, for recruiting, HR, and a number of other functions. How does one make a wise choice? Because, there are a ton of tools. That's one. And two is, everybody has a certain use case of, it's really been working. What is your suggestion or views on this question?
It's a really difficult one, and the market is so new for this. It's hard to kind of give a definitive answer, but I've got a few kind of initial thoughts on it. Obviously, using any of the OpenAI tools, they are at the moment kind of definitely one of the biggest. So the more people that are using that, the more the tool is learning all the time. So hopefully, if you want something that can do really good general stuff, generating really good content for a variety of different purposes, stick with one of the kind of the big players, but Bard, Lambda as well. These tools are kind of available at Mid-Journey if you want to use it for kind of generating images, etc., etc. So I kind of say from a corporate perspective, getting involved with one of the big guys is probably a sensible thing to do, depending on the cost. From an individual kind of recruiter perspective, it's kind of interesting, and this goes back to what we were saying before everyone joined the call. I do wonder if this is going to be something where the more enterprising, the more entrepreneurial kind of recruiters spot that they have an opportunity to build their capability, their personal brand really effectively by maintaining a degree of independence between them and their employers in terms of the AI tools that they're using. So, for example, again, follow people who are talking about AI specifically on Twitter. There are dozens of new AI tools coming out every day, literally every day. It's extraordinary. If you can find those kind of 3 or 4 really good tools that are going to fit with the way that you work and with the kind of things that you want to create and generate, then I would argue, as a recruiter, you might want to say, well, do you know what? I've got ChatGPT for kind of main work stuff. But actually, in my kind of personal time, I'm going to learn about these 2 or 3 tools. I'm going to pay for a subscription to those. And that will help me to build my brand and build my capability, build my network, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we could see a bit of that happening, as we did in the very, very early days of LinkedIn, when kind of recruiters went, oh, hang on a minute, this is my network. This is my kind of monetization of me, effectively. So I think you'll see a little bit more of that as well. But in terms of a kind of a silver bullet to kind of, solving all of the kind of the AI challenges and kind of leveraging all the opportunities, you're going to have a play around with a lot of different things, I think, at the moment.
Of course, it's a bit like what Canva did as well. Rolled out the freemium model, and then the digital marketeers started using it. That's how the freelancers got on with it, and it's like, wow, this is easy. Could use it to build the business and the brand. So definitely a good insight on that. You mentioned about the opportunities, and with the opportunities, obviously come risks as well. Given that AI, this is still pretty new, across functions. What are some of the risks associated, with Gen AI, and what are the best possible actions, as in today, companies and people can take?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously there are a few risks, and it's kind of, if you read, I mean, everyone, I'm sure, if you're on this this session, you've got an interest in AI, and if you look at the public comments that have been made by OpenAI's founders, by the previous head of Google's AI efforts. There is a real nervousness in general about what this could become. And I was reading an article a week or so ago about artificial general intelligence, which is kind of the next step for AI. And at that point, it's kind of within spitting distance of becoming sentient. And that's kind of really quite scary. But again, we're not going to talk about that today, because you're getting into a whole kind of new world of regulation and, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of from a recruitment perspective, one of the key things that I think a lot of people have already started talking about is assessment and selection, and how you can potentially use AI for that. So I'm going to put this kind of flag out there right now. If you decide that you want to create a totally automated assessment process, you could be falling foul of things like GDPR, which is obviously the European data protection standard, or the new automated employment decision tool law. I think that's right, which is coming into effect in New York in July. where basically they are saying, hang on a minute, you can't make a decision on somebody's employment based purely on AI or automation and nothing else, without being able to justify it in the case of the New York law. So you need to be super careful on the kind of the legal side of things, just to say that first of all. The second thing, which is kind of a bigger concern for me in general with this technology, is we've seen before that tech can both sustain and amplify inherent bias. And I don't think we're in a position where we can guarantee that this will be any different at the moment. So if the source data, i.e. the whole of the internet, as it pretty much is at the moment, contains bias, and it does, then that bias could be replicated and potentially even amplified in the responses that you get back from generative AI. In addition, if the code contains bias, then again, that could be a thing. Just as an example, if you go onto Midjourney, which is a kind of an image art image generative AI tool, and you look at the I can't remember what it's called, but the on the front page there's a simple nav, and it shows you kind of a showcase of all the other people have been done. And of all the ones that contain humans, the vast majority contain pictures of white women. So that's kind of interesting, because is that the users who are creating it that way? Is it the tool that's creating that? We need to kind of understand that a little bit better. So that's a big risk that I think should always be a proviso at the moment with using this technology around that kind of bias piece. You may have seen, if you've been reading about this, comments about hallucinations. So the tools can create kind of rogue responses or just erroneous responses, because at the end of the day, they're looking at kind of everything, and there's stuff out there that is not correct. So the most important thing here is that you have to have governance protocols around the use of AI in your organization and in recruitment specifically. So what it can be used for, what it shouldn't be used for, and if you're, for example, creating job specs, creating job ads, make sure that there is a protocol around the checking of that, because it won't always be right. It won't always be what you want it to be. So just make sure that you do that. So I guess to kind of follow on from that, there's a risk of plagiarism and potentially being seen to be plagiarizing kind of other stuff that's already been kind of copyrighted. So that's kind of an important one to be aware of. Candidate behaviors we've kind of touched on. So how can you tell who's used AI to enhance their CV, the job application, or take their tests? And here's an interesting one, and this might be a little bit kind of controversial, but I've been thinking about this a lot. There is a possibility that this kind of generative AI might actually create more work, not less, for people working in recruitment in the long term. So let me just kind of clarify what I mean by that. Those tasks, such as writing job ads and so on, you can do those really quickly now, which is great. And you can use this tool for, you can write policies, you can do all those kind of things. So those things that may be seen as a bit kind of not very exciting, difficult to create differentiation in them, learn how to do your prompts, and you can save yourself a load of time, which is fantastic. But imagine a world where all candidates, pretty much all candidates, are using these tools to enhance a CV, write their job applications, take tests, etc. How are you actually going to discern who of those candidates are the right ones for the job that you're actually recruiting for? And at the same time, if we make it easier for candidates to apply and apply really well and effectively, we could even see that application volumes start to go up even more than they have done over the last kind of 10 years or so. So there is a possibility that we might get into a situation where actually we have to rely more on human discernment, interviews, things like that, than we have done, than we've kind of become accustomed to over the last kind of 5 or 10 years with kind of advances in video interviewing technology and things like that. As I say, I'm floating that out there. I don't know whether or not that's going to be the case, but I do think it's a risk.
Certainly, and then, the biggest risk that you covered is bias, because ultimately it's still the humans who are developing these tools, and that's number one. And number two, they're going to get everything that's on the internet and try to get you the best responses. So it's still obviously in its infancy, to evaluate, if it's sort of working around the bias piece, or and
Yeah.
you're right. As you said that there's more work for the recruiters to evaluate the right versus wrong, or the ideal fit for a respective job. Certainly.
Absolutely. And I think just kind of just thinking about that point around bias, one of the great things about this technology is if you are interested in EDI, inclusion, diversity, etc., within your organization, and really building that into the way that you promote your jobs, the way that you promote your organization through the content that it creates and so on, it's a huge opportunity, actually. But again, this comes down to how you prompt the technology and how you make it do what you want it to do. So if somebody isn't thinking about the EDI agenda, they might find that they're sustaining and amplifying that bias. If they are thinking about it, then they can start to generate stuff that is more thoughtful around those dimensions, and that could be really exciting. But again, it comes back to how you learn to prompt the technology, which is why really you need to kind of start using it now and learning about it.
Exactly, and then a lot of things are again more business focused. What is your ecosystem as a business? What is the culture you're driving?
Yeah.
That is going to drive, from the prompts perspective as well, that, okay, fine, this is how I'm going to ask questions. Because if you're going to have a prompt sheet from the internet, which you can use as guidance, but that if you're going to use exactly the same prompts, you're going to probably end up getting exactly the same responses. And one thing that I was chatting with somebody is that there's lots of template-sized responses, going to be out in the market, in the following months, because everybody's using the same technology, probably asking the similar prompts, and what you'll see is very similar content, and which is why more video-based content is going to be the norm if you want to demonstrate authenticity rather than just have lots of text.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think that that authenticity piece is going to be what people are craving moving forward. To your point about prompting, there's tools such as PromptStorm or learnprompting.org, which can really help if you go on their kind of resources, and they can really help to kind of guide you around that. But yeah, I think that authenticity piece is going to be really important. And one of the things for those kind of those on the kind of the talent acquisition kind of side of things who are on this call, one of the things I was thinking about again a lot about this is the employer brand space. And in my kind of time running an employer brand agency, we were constantly badgering clients for more content, more kind of information that we can use to promote them, to keep things moving on the socials. Well, this gives us a great opportunity to do that now. We can generate, tons of content really quickly, but how do we make it human? How do we make sure that it's in the right tone of voice? And you can do that. There's definitely ways of doing that through using this technology, but that's about almost, it sounds a bit weird, but building a relationship with the AI tool so that it starts to recognize what you're looking for, what you like, and the way that you communicate in your tone of voice as well. And if you can do that alongside really great video content, things like that, then I think actually it could be a really, really powerful and compelling kind of employer branding mechanism as well.
Certainly. So make it think like you're thinking, and obviously it sort of predicts your likes and dislikes.
Exactly, but this is all down to your usage of it. So it's incredibly important that rather than simply, when it first came out, when ChatGPT first came out, rather than GPT-4, kind of everyone went on it and just started asking it questions, and that's great, and it's kind of fun, and it's interesting to see what comes back. But in a professional kind of environment where you're trying to differentiate either yourself as a candidate, yourself as a recruiter, or your organization, you've got to learn how to do this stuff more effectively. And you'll know quite quickly, I mean, again, playing around with this myself, quite quickly whether or not the responses are kind of any good. But rather than just firing the same question at it or slightly tweaking the question, understand what kind of prompts are going to make it work better for you. understand and start to build that kind of tone of voice recognition within the tool. Give it the feedback. That kind of thing is going to be really, really invaluable as you try and create differentiation. Because as I said before, the risk is a huge race to a kind of a homogenized pool of employers saying basically the same thing about themselves, and candidates are saying the same thing. We've got to learn how to prompt it more effectively to create that differentiation.
Sure. And then just as lastly, Ben, from your business perspective, Cogency Labs perspective, how do you guys help, talent acquisition teams?
Specifically with AI or just in general?
Just in general.
Yeah. So, I mean, AI is a good kind of example. So the reason for bringing Cogency into existence was all around trying to kind of demystify things for people. So ultimately, there's our initial kind of pitch to the market was all around kind of recruitment technology, and trying to find the right technology, implement it in the right way, or if you've got existing technology, kind of optimize it so that it does what your recruiters and your candidates actually want it to do. With something like AI, everything that we're trying to do at the moment, and incidentally, I'm not going to claim that I'm a kind of dyed-in-the-wool expert on this because it's too early for anyone to really claim that. But with AI, what we're trying to do is to help people with just practical advice about how to use it. One of the things I was going to mention earlier, which I think is really, really fascinating, and if you're in recruitment in any way, shape or form at the moment, you should be aware of this. We talk to tech vendors all the time, and the number of tech vendors who are in the process of integrating their technology, be it an ATS, a CRM, onboarding tool, whatever, with ChatGPT at the moment is extraordinary. So if you're using technology, whatever that is, whether it's a candidate relationship management system or an ATS or whatever, you should be asking your suppliers what their plan is around either integrating with this or creating their own AI engines. Because let's face it, a lot of these tech vendors have been talking about AI for years. Not actually that many have been really doing AI. So it's been quite interesting talking to some smaller vendors and some really, really big ones. And you'll see over the next 6 months, over kind of Q3 and Q4, I would predict that an awful lot of those vendors are going to be coming to market with integrations in the same way that Salesforce did back in March. Salesforce launched, I think it was Einstein GPT, which is effectively an integration with ChatGPT, which was the first AI CRM integration. You're going to be seeing an awful lot of that over the next few months in the recruitment space. So that's something that we need to keep on top of, because that's going to be part of the benefit that we can bring to our clients, is helping them to navigate that as that new technology comes in.
Sure, definitely. So, what is one takeaway that you'd give recruiters, talent acquisition, pros when it comes to using Gen AI at this stage?
Okay. I might have more than one, but I'll make it as quick as I can. So firstly,
Sure.
start using it. The simplest way is job descriptions and job ads. So that's kind of the first thing. Second is learn how to prompt effectively. So as I said before, go on Prompt Storm or something like that and learn how to do it. And the third thing, which I think is really important, is creating the protocols for the use of AI in your recruitment process. That needs to happen now, because you may have recruiters who are using it without even telling you. So you need to know what's going on. You need to know that everything that's being generated by AI is being checked. And I would say stop doing take-home coding tests or things like that, because that's just not going to work anymore. Challenge your test providers to see how their tools will mitigate AI risks. So there's still going to be some great tools out there. Some of the gamified tools, Arctic Shores, people like that. I don't see that AI is going to have a negative impact on them, but some of the more traditional ones it might. And it might also be worth kind of experimenting with creating tasks for or exercises for interviews and assessment centres, because you can certainly do that using GPT. So anyway, that's about, God, I don't know, 5 takeaways, but hopefully that helps.
No, it's certainly very helpful. So Ben, thank you very much for being on the Recruitment Curry show.
You're
Really
welcome.
enjoyed the insights, and hope you have a great curry this evening.
Thank you. I will.
All right, Ben. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye bye.